Good morning, everyone. It's Kristen here. I see the captioning. This is fantastic.
Good morning. Good morning, everyone. This is Jennifer Ling from City Clerk's office. Now we have quorum.
Thank you. If you, Jennifer, if you can hold on for a little bit, I just have to open a few screens so I can get ready for the meeting. I just need about a minute.
Okay, that's great.
Computer's warming up. Thank you.
Yeah.
And then when she's ready, we need about 30 seconds to start the YouTube.
Okay.
And folks, just as you're listening, especially for the members of the committee, I'm not in the committee room today at City Hall. I had an urgent matter that I had to attend to, and I didn't have enough time to get to City Hall. In order for me to recognize you as speakers, I'm going to have to, it's going to take me a little bit longer as I scroll from screen to screen. So if you do have questions, if you want to just go into the chat room or raise your hand, I'll do the very best I can to recognize you. But it's a little bit limiting because I don't have the full screen in front of me at home.
Okay, I will. Okay, we are good to go, Councillor Wang Tam.
Okay, thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. There is quorum, and the clerks will have advised me that the meeting can proceed. Welcome to the 10th meeting of the Toronto Accessibility Advisory Committee. I call this meeting to order. My name is Kristen Wong Tam, and I'm the chair of this committee. This meeting is being held using the City of Toronto's WebEx technology, with members and staff connected by video conferencing or calling in. We ask for your patience with any delays and technical issues. Members of the public can observe the meeting on YouTube. We are also providing captioning for this meeting. A few reminders. Staff, please keep your video turned off until you need to speak or answer questions. This will make it easier for me as chair and for those who are watching on YouTube to observe members as they participate in the debate on each item and during the votes. For the members and staff, please keep your microphones on mute unless you need to answer a question or to speak. Also, members, if you wish to speak to an item, if you can have your video on, and if you are able to, raise your hand or unmute your mic and let me know, and I will create a speakers list. When voting, if you can have your video on, and if you're able to, raise your hand or unmute your microphone to indicate your vote. And although we are participating remotely, today the committee would like to acknowledge that the land we are meeting on is the traditional territories of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. And Toronto is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, Métis peoples. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. I will now call for any declarations of interest under the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act. If you do have an interest, please unmute your microphone and let me know. Alternatively, you may also raise your hand. Seeing none, thank you. Next, we will need a motion to confirm the minutes from our last two meetings on July the 3rd and July the 20th. Can I have someone move the motion? Thank you. Howard is to move the confirmation of the minutes. All those in favor, please indicate your support by raising your hand if you can. Any opposed? That carries. Thank you very much. Let's proceed with the agenda. There are 3 items on the agenda, and I have one additional item, which is a letter from Michael Michelli regarding, and the title of this letter is Consideration of Renaming Dundas Street and Other Public Assets After Disability Accessibility Champions. Members, you have received a copy of the letter. Michael, would you like to move a motion that the letter be added to today's agenda?
Hold on, there we go. Yes, I'd like to move a motion that this letter be added to today's agenda.
Okay, thank you very much, Michael. All those in favor, please indicate your support by raising your hand if you can. Any opposed? That carries. Thank you. That item will now be known as item DI 10.4, and we're going to hold that item so the clerk can make that item public online and we can consider it in further detail during this meeting. So heading to the agenda, our first item, and there's 3, we're going to start with DI 10.1, which is the chair's report. I will be speaking to that very shortly, so we're going to hold that down. DI 10.2 is the access and waiting area at City Hall for peoples with disabilities, and this is an update. We're going to hold this item down because staff will be here to provide a presentation, a brief presentation, and also to answer any questions. I also believe that there are speakers on there. And then item number 3, we're going to hold this item down. Its title is City of Toronto Data for Equity Strategy, Accessibility Feedback. Again, we're going to hold this presentation this item down for a presentation of staff. And then we'll deal with item number 4 that we just added to the agenda. Thank you very much. All items are held down and we can proceed with the chair's report. The chair's report has already been tabled, and I want to acknowledge the hard work of the city staff as they have been doing everything they can to respond to the pandemic. But we also know that the response to the pandemic is ongoing and it's an evolving process. City Council adopted recommendations to have staff arrange for presentation to the Toronto Accessibility Advisory Committee during fall, describing how the city is supporting vulnerable people with disabilities in Toronto during and beyond COVID-19. The intention was to have the Accessibility Advisory Committee continue to fulfill its mandate of ensuring that city programs or initiatives receive advice that will enhance the inclusion of people with disabilities. And I thank all of you for your participation on that day. There's on the 20th of July, the Economic and Community Development Committee adopted an item called the Economic Advancement for Persons Living with Disabilities. This agenda item was generated through a TAC recommendation through our July the 3rd, 2020 meeting. The intention was to explore, to create a report on and support services and vendor related to safety, success, and the well-being of persons with disabilities for employment provisions, internal employment opportunities at the City of Toronto. It was also adopted by staff where we directed staff to develop an outreach model and determine an appropriate pilot strategy for the purpose of providing support and referrals to relevant services to inform voters with disabilities of their employment rights. And again, I want to thank this committee for generating that body of work, which I think is absolutely critical. And then finally, on July 21st, the Executive Committee adopted an item called Options for Assistive Remote Participation to Improve Accessibility. This item was a recommendation from our July 3rd, 2020 meeting, allowing for remote participation by Toronto Accessibility Advisory Committee members when accommodation is required. And finally, it's not in the chair's report as for this meeting, but I did want to thank the city clerk's office, the audio tech IT staff at the city. They have dramatically been working hard behind the scenes to improve the WebEx technology. You can see by today we now have captioning on the screen, which is fantastic, and they will continue to refine and enhance this platform. WebEx as a platform has been used by the City of Toronto for about 8 years now, and the vendor is Cisco. And staff have been creating dynamic modules to understand how can this software become even more accessible. 300 refinements are being worked on. They have modeled and tried about everything they can. And there is a initial patch that has been provided for the software, which can be downloaded if you have an old version. Please, you actually don't need to take any action, but they will. It's automatically downloaded. But there's a more robust version that's coming out, largely to fix and enhance the accessibility features, and that is coming very shortly. And all of that has been largely driven by comments and feedback from the general public. The members of this committee and the staff have been working hard and listening. So they get to use a software that they like, which is very secure, and they get to continue to work with Cisco, which is a vendor that they prefer. So I think that we're heading in a good way. For those who are have wanted to see this fix come sooner, I can tell you that I agree. It probably didn't come soon enough, but we are now into a place where we're going to see even further dramatic improvements to the platform. And I want to just again convey my thanks to staff and the city clerk for that. So that brings me to the end of my chair's report. Are there any questions or perhaps remarks from members here today? Seeing none, I would like to move the adoption of the report, or sorry, the item to be received for information. All those in favor, if you can indicate your support by raising your hand. Thank you, if you can. And any opposed? Seeing none, that carries. Thank you. Item number 2, access and waiting areas at City Hall for peoples with disabilities. We do have a speaker on this item, but I think first we're going to proceed to presentation. Stephen Rowlands, who is the facilities supervisor for City Hall from Corporate Real Estate Management, is joining us today, and he'll provide an overview and an update on the changes at City Hall, including the waiting areas for people with disabilities. Stephen, are you ready for your presentation and update?
Yeah, my presentation is very brief. As of now, there is a accessibility upgrade report that has been done and is still being looked at. There are various upgrades that have been included in this report, and they're still being considered at this point in time. I'm not privy to a lot of those upgrades, but that's where it stands right now.
Stephen, is that the conclusion of your presentation and update?
Oh yes, unfortunately, I don't have a laptop. My apologies, I don't have a laptop. I mean, it would be like the PMO office that's doing the project that would probably be better suited to give you the detailed information on the project and the upgrades that will be coming.
Okay, thank you. I think we will hold questions for you until after we hear from the deputants, so please hang on. I do believe we have one deputant registered, and I'm going to call upon that deputant now. Adam Cahoon. Adam Roy Cahoon.
Hello, I'm here. Can everybody hear me?
Adam, we can hear you. And welcome to the committee again.
All right, thank you. What I would like to say is two things. Even hearing the presentation, which was I would like to call super high level, maybe even satellite level. What I want to actually see is, even if it is obviously online in COVID time, a public consultation on the issues to actually get more people with multiple disabilities, and even the right now, even I admit I have privilege in that I actually know how to navigate City Hall, and I know how to fight City Hall. It was quite disappointing because I have a few friends on this committee, and talking to them privately, they didn't even know this was a problem until my story hit global news. So even before these changes were made, I know some of them were made in the eyes of security, but in looking through those, all the archives of the Toronto Accessibility Committee, you guys weren't actually told about the change to the door. So, and you know, I think it was security made unilateral.
Focus on our text.
The second thing is I know the argument is probably going to be made about all these pieces made, especially that Bay Street thing, on which department actually has responsibility over that space. I encourage the city to actually figure that out sooner than later, rather than have the update, oh, it's property of the city parks and recreation because it's Nathan Phillips Square, or it's this division, or it's the TTC, or it's that division. Figure that out so that everybody can have the proper discussion with the proper party when it's decided. And you know, and again, I am hoping, just like every one of us, that we will go back to a linear physical world where we will actually want to have needs to work at City Hall. Yes, in a perfect world, yeah, I secretly like being able to do all my work from my computer terminal. But for other people, that doesn't work, and we will want to get back into a physical space. So my advice is just to have more of this stuff laid out, and when it is laid out, before you do anything else, talk to the wider community on what their needs are.
Adam, thank you. Your timing was perfect. And thank you for your remarks. I'm going to invite the members to ask questions if they have any for you. And I don't see any hands indicated. I just want to thank you, Adam, for coming forward and sharing once again your feedback. And I don't believe there are any questions for you from the members. Are there any other registered speakers? And I don't believe so. So then we can turn our attention back to the presentation provided by Stephen. Do we have any questions of Stephen as the staff person who just provided us that information? I will recognize Wendy first, followed by Liv, and then Michael Michelli. Wendy, go ahead.
My question is, when are we going to have the details that we were expecting, I think, in the presentation today? So at what point will we know what the steps are? I think the presentation, Adam said satellite level. I think, there's really no information there for us in terms of an update. So when is that going to be provided?
My understanding is right now that a lot of these details are sitting at the senior management level. What their timeline is, I honestly don't know.
Wendy, do you have a follow-up question?
I guess it's, yeah. So what was the intention of having a presentation today, if there are no details to be shared?
Oh, sorry, it's my apologies. I guess this should have been pushed up to a higher level. I should have pushed up to a higher level. I was, my understanding of looking at the agenda, it was discussions about the equipment that was put in place by security, the desk and so on, and sorry, I thought that's where we'd be talking to. And once again, I apologize to the committee. This should have gone up to a higher level.
Wendy, any other additional comments, questions right now? Okay. Liv?
Sorry, just unmuting. That was going to be my question, just when we would see a more fulsome report. So I think we now have a response that it's coming, but we don't know when.
Okay, thank you. Next to question is Michael.
Okay, I was just going to say, you had made reference about a project management. Who is the project manager on this, and did they ever do any public consultations?
The project manager, I believe, for this project is Oksana Robertson of the PMO office. And I know they did consultations with us staff at City Hall, but whether they did public consultations, I do not know.
Okay. I was just going to say, I mean, I think listening to Adam's deputation, I think that was a major issue where there really was not consultation done with the public or even with TAC itself. And I think for a lot of members, I think this is sort of very disappointing, to say the least.
Michael, thank you. Are there any other questions from the members at this point? Great. Stephanie, I apologize. I didn't recognize you sooner. My apologies. Go ahead, please. You'll have to unmute.
Thank you for your patience. I'm just slow. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, perfect.
Thank you. I guess my question is, how do we ensure that there is, whoever this project manager is actually going to be provide fulsome thought into the accessibility features that are now no longer available, and the implementing a plan now? How do we ensure that that is on their top of their minds? Since obviously you indicated that you're not the individual, how do we then ensure that the person who is, or the project committee that is doing this, has that in the forefront of their mind, so that anything that is, because we all know once a design is created or a plan is created, it's very difficult for us to then push back, especially when it's something that is very, the timelines are probably very short, I would assume, especially because of COVID, etc., and the circumstances that we're in. I would just like to know that there's going to be that thought placed in so that we don't have to then do, which will be more costly, post fixes. I want them to be, how do we ensure that that information gets to them? Would you know?
Stephen, that was the question for you.
Sorry. Like I said, I guess getting in contact with project management, and I will pass information on to them that you would like to have discussions with them about the implementations.
So there is no direct link between you and the person who, or the committee project manager that you indicated, so you can, is there a direct link between you and the project manager? Let's put it that way.
There has been contact, but as I said, the contact has been just related to questions regarding City Hall.
Okay. Are you the person that, so you indicated that you're not the individual we should be speaking with because you don't have a direct contact to the project manager, is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. So do you know who their admin person is, or how we would then get in contact? Or is that something that we would ask the clerk staff? I don't know the procedure. Because unfortunately, Stephen, I'm going to be very direct with you. Right now, you're not giving me a lot of confidence that when you say you're going to pass on information, I don't know what kind of information you're going to be passing on outside of the fact that you came, we weren't pleased. I'd like to know how we actually ensure that accessibility guidelines, people with disabilities are actually thought of in this process.
Okay, well, I can pass this information on to my manager, and she's been in contact. My director has been involved in the project too, so information can be passed on to them to contact the project manager and relate your concerns.
Do these people have names?
Yeah, my manager is Antonella Kochiro, and my director is Irene Granewski.
And I'm assuming that the captioner will have the spelling correct on those?
We will certainly make sure that we alert and involve the appropriate staff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. Okay, thank you, Stephen. Thank you for your candid responses.
To speak, starting with Liv and then Michael.
To the chair and the clerk's staff, can we request a presentation from these appropriate named individuals to be added to our next agenda?
So it's Kristen speaking again. I've just sent over a message to the clerk that I would like to have this item deferred to at least our next meeting. And in the interim, to make sure that there is a strategy for public engagement. This is not the best way for this item to be coming back to us. And clearly there are some missing pieces, and I would rather hope that we have a fuller report, even if it's something in writing. Doesn't have to be perhaps a report, but at least a presentation. So that was my intention, and I know that Jennifer has probably just received that email. What I would propose is that we would hold this item down, bring back the matter when we have the motion as prepared, so we can vote on it, and then to have the item brought back. But before we do that, I apologize to everybody here, but I now see Michael who would like to speak, so I want to recognize him. Michael, please go ahead.
Okay, I'm just unmuting. I'm just going to echo Liv's point, though, that I think having these individuals like Oksana Robertson, who is the project manager, having them to come and present would be helpful in terms of having more details. Even the other thing, too, that I had, based on Adam's thing and the piece in Global News and the letter that I sort of wrote as well, there's the part about the Elizabeth and Hagerman Street entrance, but also the Bay entrance as well. And so even just trying to figure out the ownership, and Adam alluded to it, is it, Parks and Recreation? Is it the city? Is it the TTC? And I think we sort of need to have that full discussion all together, though. So just to sort of include that.
Okay. Michael, thank you. It's Kristen speaking again. I will make sure that we have the appropriate senior level staff come before the committee at our next meeting. And I will certainly take that on as the chair. Wendy, is that your hand indicating wanting to speak? Go ahead, please.
Thank you. I just wanted to echo, I think, some of what you're hearing. The committee members all spend our own time to come to these meetings. Certainly for a number of us, it's time away from work, definitely time away from our lives and our families and other things that we're trying to do. So just, a gentle reminder that if people are coming to the committee, that we do expect to hear information from presenters, not just nothing.
Wendy, thank you for your comments. Anyone else to speak? Because we're going to stand it down and bring it back for a vote on a deferral. Okay. Seeing none, we're just going to hold this down while the motion is prepared. We're going to go to item number 3, and I know that the staff will probably have a full presentation for us here.
I just wanted to say one thing. I'm sorry.
Sorry, Stephanie. I apologize. Okay, please
I'm
go ahead.
slow on the. I just wanted to make a comment to say that. Gosh, now I think I must have lost it. You know what, Miranda? I think she has her hand up as well, and then I can regroup. I was trying. If I could defer to Miranda and then come back to me.
Sure. I
okay,
actually
Kristen?
try to hold the item down so we can come back to vote on the deferral. But if you folks want to continue to speak to it, that's not a problem. Miranda, did you want to speak?
I think.
Oh, yes. Hi, and thank you so much for the opportunity. And I just want to say that, some of the other members have kind of mentioned this as well. I'm just kind of puzzled with this particular item. And I guess it's because, a lot of the detail is missing. I just want to mention that when the presenters do come back with information on this to share with the committee, if I just want to emphasize, if they can clearly define what they mean by safe waiting areas in this particular item, because it can be very broad. Is it just for physical structure? Are they including elements of safety measures with the pandemic involved in this? There's so much uncertainty and a lot of questions around this that I think we need to be more clear exactly what we intend with this. Thank you.
Thank you, Miranda. Should I come back to you, Stephanie?
I think I'm just going to make a general comment that I'm just again reiterating the notion that I want to ensure that accessibility is contemplated and considered, because my fear is what's going to happen. The individual will return, and it will be a temporary. Anyways, that's my only concern. Thank you.
Okay.
I lost my train of thought.
That's okay. It's that kind of morning. We're going to come back to the item anyways, just so we can deal with the motion and the deferral. I'm going to proceed now to item number 3. And item number 3, we are expecting a presentation from staff. Today we have Narina Nagra from the People Equity Division and Erica Candor from the Social Development Finance Administration Division to provide us with an overview of the proposed data for equity strategy for the City of Toronto.
Thank you, Councillor Wong-Tam, and thank you, TAC members. Councillor Wong-Tam already introduced me, but that was what I was going to kick it off. But today we're here to present to you the data for equity strategy. So I'm going to pass it on to Erica, and I'll be speaking later in the presentation.
Great, thank you. So to start, I'd just like to talk about the purpose of our presentation today. So we're here to tell you basically to describe the Data for Equity strategy that we will be proposing to Economic and Community Development Committee, and to outline and discuss the collection and use of disability data specifically, which is part of this strategy. So I'll start by providing an overview, and then I'll pass it on to Narina to speak about some of the details. So to start, I think, oh, sorry, next slide, please. I apologize, yeah. So we can go to the, to slide number 2, please. Perfect, thank you. So to start, I think it's important to articulate why the City of Toronto needs a data for equity strategy. So as you all know, I think the city acknowledges that inequities exist and that not all Toronto residents and service users have the same access to health, well-being, inclusion, and participation. This includes some groups of people, including people with disabilities, who face discrimination and barriers resulting in worse outcomes. To address these inequities, the city has adopted strategies and initiatives such as the poverty reduction strategy and the equity lens tool. Those are just 2 examples, which there's images that are pictured on the slide of these strategies, but many strategies and initiatives to help address these inequities. So in May of 2018, City Council directed staff to develop a disaggregated data strategy so that it's possible for us to understand who is accessing city programs, who is achieving which outcomes, and who is encountering service barriers. So this strategy is needed to advance the city's equity priorities by enabling us to measure and be accountable to Indigenous, Black, and equity-seeking groups, to provide a framework for consistent collection and use of comparable socio-demographic data sets, and to support the city's ability to make evidence-based decisions that are informed by equity considerations and by the community's experiencing inequities. Next slide, please. So the Data for Equity strategy's purpose is to facilitate city divisions' ability to access, use, collect, analyze, and act on equity-related data. And the strategy provides guidelines on how best to do this in a consistent way. The focus of this work, I should say, is public-facing. So we're interested in the socio-demographic characteristics of residents, program participants, and service users. Data for Equity focuses on collecting and using data that can be broken down by socio-demographic characteristics, as I mentioned. So when we say this, we're talking about who people are, excuse me, who people are and how they identify, for example, Indigenous communities, racialized groups, gender identities, people with disabilities, and also where people live, such as neighborhoods. The Data for Equity strategy will propose a set of guiding principles that outline the city's responsibilities when collecting and using socio-demographic and disaggregated data. These principles are equity, inclusion, and human rights, privacy and security, open data, Indigenous data governance, and Black communities and data governance. We can go to the next slide, please. So I mentioned that the staff report is planned to go to Economic and Community Development Committee. The planned date is October 14th, so next month. And I want to start by mentioning that the strategy was developed through extensive research, through review of many existing resources out there, and through consultation. And Narina's going to speak about this a bit more in a few minutes. But I do want to just mention that we looked at the experiences and current state within city divisions for other local and provincial partners, so partners in Toronto and in other parts of the province, and in other cities and sectors in Canada. What was clear from all these experiences, or the collection of them, is that socio-demographic data collection and data use is complex. It requires substantial time and resources, and it's challenging to do it successfully and to sustain it successfully. So great care and consideration has to be taken to ensure that this work is done well and that it doesn't create additional barriers to service, that it doesn't cause harm or perpetuate stereotypes or lead to public mistrust. A key part of this is ensuring that staff are trained and supported adequately to do the work, we need to be aware that it takes time to improve data quality, and it takes time to get to the point, time and resources to get to the point where the data is good enough and robust enough to be able to use it to identify inequities and make change. Based on what we learned, we're proposing a phased approach. So a phased implementation that begins with pilot projects. And this approach really seemed like the most feasible and sustainable considering the challenges that I just outlined. So the plan is for phase 1 to take place over 18 months, starting in the summer of 2021. And the activities that are listed on this slide are the key activities of the first phase. So I'll just walk through these. So one is establishing a data for equity staff unit to lead the implementation of the strategy. 2 is providing a set of guidelines for all city divisions, and these guidelines include steps and guidance for how to plan data collection and use, standardized socio-demographic questions and responses to promote consistency of how we collect this data and good quality data, recommended approaches and procedures for how to implement this work, and the Data for Equity unit will provide support to divisions to implement or use these guidelines. A third key part of this first phase will be to implement pilot projects to test the guidelines and evaluate outcomes and evaluate the process as well. So the pilots that were selected because they are feasible, they are at a good state to be ready to implement, or they're an expansion of existing programs and they have potential to have equity impacts. So specifically, they are the collection of expanded socio-demographic data from Ontario Works recipients, people diagnosed with COVID-19, clients who access the early on child and family centers, and program participants at 11 community organizations that are funded by the City and the United Way, that receive funding from City and the United Way. A fourth key element to this work, to the first phase, will be ensuring that there is community guidance so that the strategy can be accountable, transparent, and responsive to diverse community needs. And a part of this will be working on Indigenous and Black community governance. There will be the development of corporate-wide resources, including tools for divisions to support their data collection and educational materials and training as well. Another important piece of this is that the guidelines and their implementation will be supported through the existing privacy, information, and technology activities and processes at the city, because there are many that are impacted by this. And there will be a report to Council in the first quarter of 2023 with a summary of the key findings, the outcomes, and lessons learned from phase 1, as well as a recommended approach for how to proceed with the next phase of this work. Next slide, please. So this slide shows the list of the 10 key socio-demographic data points that we would like to see eventually all programs at the city collecting and using where appropriate. And they include race, Indigenous identity, disability, gender, sexual orientation, and income, to name about half of them. This minimum set of 10 was selected because all of these data points have really important equity implications and are relevant across all city programs and services. There is substantial evidence and experiences that have shown that these factors impact people's access and experiences of services and also influence their outcomes. So these data points can be measured, they can be analyzed, and they can be acted upon in different ways to address barriers. We know that there are many other important socio-demographic characteristics as well that impact equity, and the Data for Equity guidelines will include some additional optional data points, which include ethnicity, religion, citizenship and immigration status, housing, family and household composition, education, and employment. So I'm going to ask for the next slide, please, and I'm going to now pass it on to Narina to speak to the next section.
Thanks, Erica. So the Data for Equity strategy and guidelines were developed, as Erica mentioned, by an interdivisional working group consisting of staff with equity and data expertise. And we did consult and engage with a range of internal as well as external stakeholders to learn from past experiences and build on existing questions and guidelines that have already been published. So this included learning about City Division's socio-demographic data collection and use currently in the last few years, consulting with various experts and learning from specific experiences of other local and provincial initiatives. So this included the Toronto District School Board's parent and student census, the Toronto Central LIN's data collection within healthcare organizations, the Ontario Anti-Racism Directorate's provincial data standards and guidelines, and along with some provincial experiences in child welfare, youth justice, and education sectors. We also consulted with city community advisory groups, community members, and organizations specifically representing Indigenous, Black, and equity-seeking groups. And we also did conduct an extensive jurisdictional scan of other cities in Canada, the US, and internationally. Next slide. So for the collection of disability data, we work closely with the accessibility unit in the People and Equity Division and reviewed other experiences of collecting disability data to come up with options for the collection of this type of data of service users and residents in Toronto. Generally, there is a lack of high quality and consistent data on people with disabilities. It is not collected consistently, it's not valued, and not used at the same rates as other socio-demographic information. Due to the known issues and complexities of collecting disability data, we engaged and consulted with disability academics, research, and experts from various institutions, including the University of Toronto, Ryerson University, and York University. And we also consulted with city tables that represent people with disabilities that are listed on this slide. This focused engagement helped determine the best questions to ask. We contemplated the two main types of data collection for people with disabilities. The first one being an identity-based approach, and the second one being the activity limitations and activities of daily living approach, which is used by health and social science surveys. Both options are not perfect and result in missing people either way. We acknowledge that disability is a hard concept to capture fully. We ultimately landed on an identity-based approach for the questions because it was consistent with other socio-demographic questions, and the activity limitations approach requires a suite of questions which is lengthy and requires resources to ensure high-quality data and minimization of errors when doing complicated analysis. The Data for Equity disability data elements that I'll be presenting next has two options for the collection of disability data. Next slide. So this first option is a single question that asks if the person identifies as a person with a disability based on a definition provided on the slide, which I'll be reading. So this definition has been adapted from the Accessible Canada Act and shortened by removing the list of barriers to make it a more plain language. So it reads, disability is understood as any physical, mental, developmental, cognitive, learning, communication, sight, hearing, or functional limitation that, in interaction with a barrier, hinders a person's full and equal participation in society. A disability can be permanent, temporary, or episodic, and visible or invisible. This option provides information on the number of service users and residents who identify as a person with a disability based on this definition. Next slide. The second option includes 4 questions, and it asks if a person identifies as a person with a disability without a definition, the types of disabilities they live with, and this can include blindness or low vision, learning disability, mobility disability, and a number of other options, whether they have experienced any barriers when accessing city programs and services, and where those barriers have occurred while accessing services such as attending an event or program in person, entering or navigating a building, and communicating and interacting with staff. Next slide. So this option can help gain a better understanding of the types of disabilities people live with and the barriers they may experience when accessing and using city programs and services. This option is recommended only in cases where the data will be used to inform current and future service planning and delivery practices, or address accessibility barriers that have been identified. The accessibility unit is available to provide support to city staff in choosing the best option once the guidelines and the strategy are launched. Next slide. So that's the end of Erica's and my presentation. The purpose for today is we wanted to present you with an overview of the strategy, but specifically we are interested in hearing your feedback on the following questions. Do you have any specific feedback or experiences with disability data collection and use? And based on your experiences, are there any challenges or opportunities that can help us to advance this important work? Thanks very much. The next slide has our contact information as well.
Thank you very much to both Narina as well as to Erica for that full presentation. That was certainly a huge body of work condensed into a very few slides, and I know that you folks have been working really hard to get this project off the ground, and I just think what you've just shared with us is a very encouraging phase one of work. I want to be able to, I know that I don't believe that we have any speakers, so I want to be able to open it up to questions of our committee members. And I think that you actually have been prompted now by both Narina and Erica to provide those specific feedbacks that they're seeking. So if I can just see an indication of hands, I recognize Liv, Michael, Wendy, and then Stephanie, and we'll start there, okay? Liv, please go ahead.
I want to commend you both on this effort. I think it's overdue, but it looks like it's being done in a really thoughtful and considered way. So I really want to commend you on that. And there's so many dimensions. We're just hearing specifically about disability, but I'm assuming there's been a lot of consultation on each of those dimensions. So it's a big project. I have a couple questions and some responses to your feedback questions. My first question is just to hone in a little bit on the timeline. It sounds like the pilot will be running and then there'll be a report in 2023. Just want some clarification on that. And also just to note that we're in the midst of a time of the Build Back Better / recovery of intensive planning. And so the sooner we can have data, because as you acknowledge, there's very little data and little or still quality data to inform the intense amount of planning that's happening. I'm a little concerned about not having a wider approach till 2023, given what's happening right now and what's going to continue to happen in the next 18 months or so. So I'll start with that question. I have some others, but I'll start with that.
Okay, I can respond to that, and then Erica, please feel free to add to that. So as we mentioned and presented, I know it's a very brief presentation, but the first key critical thing around the phase one is that we are requesting approval and support by council to fund a data for equity unit. And so phase one will only commence when that unit is in place, which we're anticipating will be June of 2021. So so that's a critical part of phase one, and then once we start with the unit, then it will be about connecting with each of the pilots, ensuring that they're collecting the questions that we want, and then from there we want to have enough time to collect a robust level of data, sort of connect related to data quality, and then be able to report out related to the timeline. So the timeline we've worked with is an 18-month timeline for the pilots to collect the data sets and then be able to report out, analyze, and make some sort of recommendations and insights related to that.
Okay, I understand the desire to do it in a way that fully supports the units that are going to be taking on the pilots. I think the creation of a permanent data for equity unit makes a lot of sense. I'm just expressing some concerns about sort of potentially missing the boat on collecting data and using it now to inform planning that's going to be happening now. So I just wanted to express that. I'm not sure that there's much that can be done about that at this point, but just to formally express that. I also had a question about the scope. We've, at this committee, have heard from folks doing transportation planning, GTC planning, and have heard about the lack of information around where people with disabilities live. And also, we've definitely noted the difficulties during this COVID pandemic around the lack of collection from Toronto Public Health. Will units or divisions, I'm not sure quite the bureaucratic structures, but will TPH, will TTC, will those areas be collecting data through this new project? I'm assuming not in the pilot phase, but once it's should it be approved as a permanent aspect of data collection at the city?
Okay,
Your
I'll answer.
microphone is on mute.
Sorry, I was having trouble unmuting myself. Would you like me to try to respond to that? And then Norina, feel free to jump in. So I think that there are a few things I can say to respond. I think definitely there's a desire, and I think the earlier direction from council to develop a disaggregated data strategy was with the long-term intent of doing something that that is citywide. I think the challenges are just all the challenges that I already described, and so there is a need to sort of to do it bit by bit. However, in the meantime, and part of what the report will detail is that, you know, various divisions are trying to do a better job of collecting and using socio-demographic data to the point that, and disaggregated data to the point that they can. So I think part of what our guidelines will speak to is how to is providing some guidance on how to access existing data sets as well, because I think some of what you spoke to is also about there's definitely a lack of data out there, but also there may be some existing data that divisions could access. So there are some guidelines, there is some guidance provided in the guidelines around how divisions can do that. To the question about the specific divisions, we are currently starting with the pilots. Toronto Public Health is one of those pilots. And they have already started collecting some additional socio-demographics through their COVID-19 case management process. So the work with contacts, and part of the work will be, but it's still a limited set right now, and it does not currently include disability. So, but they're, you know, as part of the pilot work, I think the hope is to explore how they can collect a broader set, and they are, I think, aware of and have that desire to do that. I do also want to mention, just around the recovery and rebuild point, that, you know, there have been, again, some specific examples where some of this information that's already been collected or that's already been underway has been able to inform at least some of the COVID-19 response. And I think Toronto Public Health is a great example of that. So they did begin, you know, a few months into COVID-19, they began collecting some additional socio-demographics, including race, and income data, and have tried to use some of that data to really understand some of the inequities related to who's impacted by COVID-19 and to help inform some responses, including helping to figure out which schools to prioritize in which neighborhoods that might need additional resources as kids go back to school, and who might need smaller class sizes, and also around figuring out where mobile and kind of pop-up testing sites might be needed to help the province identify sites for that. So there has been some of this data has been used. We're trying to expand that over time, but that's an example.
Okay.
Yeah, can I just add, I'll add one other point, just to add to Erica's pieces. The other thing that will be happening is that once the report is made public, we are also including a set of guidelines, and the data points that I represented in the presentation will be included in these set of guidelines. So they are going to be made available to all city divisions to take up if they so choose, and it includes sort of best practices on how to start data collection, how to ensure we're abiding by privacy, legislative and requirements, but also what are our sort of standardized recommended data elements and how to ask those and what to consider. So there is also an opportunity with the launch of the guidelines that other sectors, along with other divisions that are not necessarily identified as a pilot, may choose to take up these data elements, and there may be more robust collection happening sooner than later.
Thank you. I would just say, with regards to Toronto Public Health, I think, they've been great at recognizing that social determinants have been a huge factor in this pandemic. I do see the progress in collecting data related to race, but unfortunately, we haven't seen that progress with data related to disability. And people with disabilities have also been very disproportionately impacted by COVID. So if there is an opportunity to support them in beginning to collect data and making that pivot before it's official, as they have with race, that would be very helpful. And I think, we on the committee, not to speak for everyone on the committee, but I think we would definitely encourage that. Finally, just to respond to your question, and then I will be quiet for a good long while. In terms of data collection, in my work, we do a lot of data collection and surveys. And I know other people in the committee do in their work as well. And I would encourage you to look, yes, at plain language. Your first option is still, even though it's shorter, still a bit cumbersome, I think. But also consider visuals, really important visuals to support your questions. Whether videos can be helpful, even having a video of someone reading the question can be helpful, but pictorials that go along with the questions to support understanding. And obviously having the material available in accessible formats. I'm sure you've already considered that, but I would really encourage you to consider the different ways that people take in and process information. So thank you.
Liv, thank you. Our next, and just so you know, I am keeping track of time, although it's hard to see because I can't turn on the timer. And our next member to question is Michael. And I think, Michael, if there's an opportunity for you also to provide some feedback to the questions that both Narina and Erica posted, that would also be very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Councillor Wong-Tam. I was just going to say, echoing Liv's comments, so fantastic presentation. Clearly, you've been very thorough and comprehensive, and I think that's great. So one of the things that I was going to say, just off of Liv's comment about some of the divisions, in addition to Toronto Public Health, the two other divisions that would be sort of worthwhile considering would be Toronto Community Housing Corporation, as there are a lot of people with disabilities who do live in TCHC buildings. And then the other one is Shelter and Support Services as well. There are a lot of people with disabilities who right now are really struggling. They might be using drop-ins, they might be using shelters, and we know that there are issues in terms of accessibility of shelter services. So those two divisions I would strongly consider. Also in terms of outreach as well, there's something called AOCS as well. Those are specific City of Toronto agencies like the 519 Community Center that does outreach to the LGBT community. You've got other organizations like Apple Grove that does children and seniors. So I would also consider that too. I realize that this is a pilot project, but we want to sort of use as many city agencies as we can, especially those that do specific outreach. I think one of the things too that sort of didn't come up, and again, I realize that this is a pilot project, though. There's the concept of intersectionality or multiple identities. And the idea is that you may not just identify as a person with a disability, you may also identify as a member of the LGBT community, or you may also identify as a racialized group member. And so I think that's something to also consider too, in terms of the research, though, that you may have distinct sort of characteristics or features. And then the other thing too that I was going to say, I'm wondering, and this is a question part, has your group thought of using a participatory action research model whereby you will include individuals either who have disabilities or part of a particular racialized group or are Indigenous to help use those individuals to help sort of guide the research process. And then from there, they might be able to identify individuals in the community that are helpful. So that's probably a long-winded question.
Michael, who would you like to answer that question?
Either Narina or Erica, whoever would like to take the question.
I'm happy to start, and then Narina, please do jump in. So this is Erica speaking. So first of all, I just want to say thank you for all those suggestions and that feedback. It's very helpful, and we'll definitely, I'm taking rapid notes, and we'll be taking all of this back in considering it and figuring out how we can address it. So around your question, I think we are currently we're not exploring a participatory action research model. We are trying to figure out how best to engage community members from diverse and equity-seeking groups. And I think that's where we're starting. So in addition to the consultation that was done leading up to this, to actually help provide advice and guidance for the work, we are looking to ensure that we do get guidance from diverse community members and diverse and equity-seeking groups. And so that work will be part of what the Data for Equity unit leads, ensuring that community guidance. The form it's going to take is still being developed. And I don't know if there's anything you want to add to that, Narina, but I think it's still, so exactly what that looks like, I'm not sure yet, but that is definitely going to be an important component. Community guidance will be an important component of the work.
Yeah, I'll just echo what Erica said, is that we're still, as part of the beginning of the initiative, is that that's going to be very closely contemplated about how to best use existing tables, such as tax, such as some of the other ones we already have in place, to ensure that there is sort of community guidance throughout the full process, or not only on the front end of collection, but also on the analysis and the recommendations that come out of results, is that we want to be doing it alongside the most impacted communities. And that is going to be a critical focus of the rollout of the strategy.
Okay, thank you so much for the answer. I was just going to say, and I know this may be getting a little bit into the weeds, so I noticed for the descriptors about mental health, I noticed the word addictions was missing. And so I'm just wondering if that was an oversight or if that's something that you're going to consider adding to that as well. And whoever would like to answer, either Erica or Narina.
Oh, sorry. I wasn't sure if you were going to speak, but I'll speak. Narina. So yeah, I will look. I'll make a note of that. We did, again, work closely with the accessibility unit in drafting the specific questions and also adopting the Accessible Canada Act definitions. So that definitely, I'll make a note of that, and we'll bring that back to see where we're most appropriate to include. Thank you for that piece of feedback.
Okay, thank you.
So do you have any other questions?
No further questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Just if I can just have a show of hands. Our next two members to question are Wendy as well as Stephanie. Is there anyone else? Michelle, I see you. Okay, thank you. Okay, so go ahead. Wendy, you have the floor.
Thank you. I think this looks great. Congratulate you and everybody who's been working on this. I think it is really heartening to see that there is specific focus on this outstanding question of data related to disability disaggregated data. So well done to everybody working on it. I wondered if you could tell us a little bit more about two of the points that you referenced, the Indigenous and Black community data governance models and how you envision them impacting the work. And the reason I'm asking is because my organization, the Center for Independent Living in Toronto, is currently working with the Inclusive Design Research Center at OCAD University on similar kinds of guidance related to people with disabilities. And I'm sort of wondering if how similar they are, and if there's maybe something that's happening in terms of this work that we're doing that could be of use in terms of the work that you're looking at. So could you, I guess the question is just, could you tell us a little bit more about what those data governance models mean in terms of the work, and whether or not there could be room for something specific to people with disabilities there?
You want me to go first? Yeah. So I'll go ahead, and then Narina, please feel free to jump in. So I guess, so part of the work of phase one for sure is going to be to try to better develop approaches for Indigenous and Black data governance. I think there's substantial, I guess, evidence and certainly substantial community and experts have highlighted how data has been used without the involvement of Indigenous and Black communities and people with disabilities as well, and how it has not been used to benefit them, it has not been shared with them, and it has in some cases been used to harm them. And so a key part of this is a key part of phase one will be, to figure out how do we actually action our Black and Indigenous data governance principles. So we have a set of principles that were that will be included in the strategy and in the report, but we do need to figure out how to develop models to appropriately apply those. And in the case of Indigenous data governance, there are some models, but typically the ones we've seen are much more partnerships with one specific Indigenous organization and not necessarily sort of a broad community approach that includes diverse Indigenous voices. So the Data for Equity unit will be working closely with the Indigenous Affairs Office to develop an approach for that, to ensure that experts and leaders from Indigenous communities have a voice and are playing a role in advising on all aspects. Again, back to Narina's point, starting from the planning stage and collection and moving on to how to use the data and how to analyze it and how to use it. So that's so that work will be a key part of phase one, is actually developing an approach. But one piece that's been identified is that a circle of leaders and experts and community members from the Indigenous community will be developed, or that a circle will be created to help provide this guidance. On the Black communities and data governance front, it's less clear what the approach is going to be. So again, that will be part of the development. There's a lot of work happening in the community right now among Black community leaders and researchers and experts around developing principles and a framework and recommended approaches to how to ensure this governance. So again, we're going to be closely monitoring what they're developing and trying to figure out how best to ensure this guidance. I think we'd be very interested as this rolls out to learn from the work that you're doing with the group at OCAD, because I think I think it's a new area. There's a lot being developed right now, and there's no clear one model that's the best way to do it. I think a lot of people are trying to figure out how best to do this. So I think it'd be really great to learn more about the work that you're doing. I'll stop there and see if Narina wants to add anything.
Yeah, I'll just add that one of the critical pieces related to the principles related to Indigenous data governance and Black communities and data governance is a recognition of the harm that has been done around previous data collection initiatives, and really part of that is to ensure that when we're going about collecting this data in various city services and programs, that it isn't just that same experience of feeling like you want to collect this information about me, but what are you actually going to do to make a change? when I'm facing so many disparities and inequities, every day, and my health issues, et cetera. So it's about building the trust, I think, around how are we doing this alongside these impacted and affected communities that have been, treated differentially and unfairly. And so that's sort of a key focus, but it's not to exclude other groups that face these discrimination, et cetera, as well. We're not, there's definitely an intentional focus to ensure all groups that face inequities in the City of Toronto are getting the information they need to, and that we're also collecting it to use it for change, right? We're not just collecting it and saying we're collecting it and then not doing anything with it. So all of these pieces and principles are going to be worked out as we move forward in phase one. And we definitely, as Erica mentioned, would be great to hear about the work at OCAD and how we can ensure that we're learning from these really innovative new ideas that are coming out that are again about working with the folks most impacted.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I think if you're open to considering at some point, it wasn't clear to me. I know you're doing a pilot in terms of these two communities, but if you're open to considering people with disabilities in the same context, with the same kinds of needs for structure around data governance and the same sorts of requirements around involvement. Certainly, our communities have also been harmed in the process of data collection, and that data has often been used against them. So, if there's something that we could do as a committee, if there's something that I could do to support that work, please let us know. I'll follow up with you both, if it's okay with you, and send you a link to the project that we're working on currently that's looking at this. It's looking at these questions in the context also of, for example, artificial intelligence, and how those kinds of algorithms have forced people with disabilities to the edges, and also identify people with disabilities in kind of disparaging ways. So I think there's a lot relevant to that work that I'd really like to kind of put you in touch with too. I just wanted to kind of underscore, I think, what some of the folks on the committee have said as well around, people with disabilities and the impact in particular of COVID and the lack of data there. If public health is already working on, we know that they are, which is brilliant, and you've heard that from everybody here, already looking at trying to collect some additional data. And I'm certainly aware that you don't decide the data collection strategy for public health, but the fact that people with disabilities have been continue to be disproportionately impacted by COVID, and now we are definitely seeing a second surge, and that we still don't know where people with disabilities sit in terms of the impact there, if they can be encouraged, and other units that are key to kind of moving through the next wave of the pandemic to think about how they collect and actually to collect disability data. I think that would be a very important outcome for all of us. I wanted to comment briefly on something that Michael had said around language. So I know, Michael, you've asked about addictions in that survey. And just to further complicate things, certainly in the context in which I used to work, which was with people living with HIV, the word addictions is not used. We talk about substance use, particularly in that community. So just to say, I recognize some of the challenges that you have all been working through around language in this context, and it's a very nuanced and tricky job that you've been doing. And that's it for me. So thank you very much for the work that you're doing, and best of luck.
Wendy, thank you for those questions and also for those comments and clarification. Our next member to question is Stephanie, then followed by Michelle. Stephanie, you have the floor.
Thank you. Hi. I think you guys know that you've done great work, and this sounds like a really fabulous opportunity. So I'm just going to get to my questions. And one of the things, and Wendy touched on it, and I'll just tell you what I wrote. Privacy, huge. Because when you were asking about any kind of potential, if we've been involved in data collection, that is one of the main issues that I've often seen when I was working, and it was really for employment equity purposes. And that, we stress confidentiality, we stress, no identity, but at the same time, we still have difficulty with people providing that info. And I guess I'm bringing that to you as a knowledge factor, because I'm thinking I can see the first question might be is like, what's the purpose? And you've already clarified that. So I think that that's great because you identified that. And I think that the other thing would be just as, again, to complement Wendy you said, is that it's not going to be, I think there's an intense fear that something will be taken away from you if you give too much information about yourself. And I think that's a real fear that many people with disabilities have, especially because of lack of housing, low income, all kinds of different features that I think you already know affect the community as a whole. So that was my biggest thing that's going to probably be your biggest challenge in terms of getting individuals to, as you indicated, provide trust, make sure that this is they feel comfortable in providing like very detailed information about themselves, and that it is going to be confidential. And I think one of the things that for me, when I was thinking about the data collection and postal codes, was I know that the City of Toronto has, based on each riding, you can look up demographics. And I guess my question would be, and or my thought would be that this would not add to those, but I don't know. Are you thinking that that might be a supplement to the demographic information that is available to the public based on the ridings, like in the long term? I think that would be my one question. And if it's because that might be a hindrance, I don't know. Just asking the question. It's one question.
I'll start off, and then Erica, please chime in. So if I understand your question, I mean, just in terms of your first comment question around privacy, most definitely privacy, confidentiality are critical principles. We actually are, legislatively required to ensure we're following MFIPA, that we're only doing data collection for a purpose. So there's very much going to be a front end component of the strategy where we have to ensure that all of the privacy principles are being adhered to, and that confidentiality and the safety and security of IT systems, et cetera, is in place, and that we know best practices around data collection of the public is knowing not only like the purpose of why you're collecting, but also who's going to see this data and who's going to access it and what you're going to do with the information. So those are going to be key parts of the rollout of ensuring staff that are collecting it are aware of those pieces, of informing whoever you're collecting the data from are aware of those components. In terms of your second sort of question, if I understood you correctly, so we, as part of the strategy is, as Erica mentioned, is also about are we doing good enough around using existing data sets? So there is sort of the data that is available through the census. That can be mapped out, related to at the neighborhood level and at the city level as well. And so there is going to be some efforts to try and get more divisions to start using the data sets that are available. But alongside that is around specific programs and services collecting this data. So dependent in terms of the data element on neighborhood and postal code, there is, because we look at service delivery models within our city, and currently we have 140 neighborhoods. That is the critical area that we want to look at, is around what service use is happening within our neighborhoods. So that is the focus of that data element, is being able to map the data points and the service users by neighborhood level. So in terms, and then the secondary component is around the open data piece. So I don't know if that's what you were saying in terms of publicly available data sets, is that there is also a component of the strategy that's going to be looking at how do we provide these data sets to the open data platform that the City of Toronto has. And right now, TPH has released their data from the case in contact COVID data set. So that is available. So that is going to be a component. It's one of our principles. It is something that City Council has directed be a part of this strategy. And so that, again, will also be worked along with our colleagues within the open data staff team to ensure that there is clear steps on how to best do that, when it can be done in a way that is still, confidentiality is adhered to, so people cannot be identified.
Okay, perfect. Thank you for letting me know. Um, and that's exactly what one of the questions was this to determine funding. So obviously it is going to then be narrowed down to ensure that specific programs. And you had mentioned that there were going to be 11 organizations. And I just wanted to know if that's just, if you've already determined the organizations and whether or not they're uh, affiliated or not affiliated with the City of Toronto? Are they independent, or is that still to be determined?
Yes, I can speak to that question. So there are the 11 community agencies that were identified. They are already identified, and that happened through a process that was led by the City of Toronto's Community Funding Unit and the United Way, and they did that in partnership also with the Toronto Central Local Health Integration Networks. So they were all of the agencies are receive funding from the city's community funding unit and or the United Way. And I think the majority of them receive some funding from both. And the intent, the sort of purpose of that pilot was to try to get to a point where was to, I guess, explore whether it would be possible to have funded agencies all reporting on a consistent socio-demographic data set so that funders were aware of which communities they were investing funds into. And so that because, you know, for many funding programs, there's criteria related to specific equity-seeking groups and addressing inequities more broadly. But we don't always have a lot of information about who those programs are actually reaching. And so that was the intent. So we do have that list. I don't have the list in front of me, but it's certainly something I can easily provide afterwards if the committee would like that.
Yes, that would be helpful. Thank you. Yeah. And then I also wanted to ask, sorry again, about the questions relating to disability. You provided two options for us to look at. Are you looking for feedback on those? Or are those options that you're bringing forward for, and then they determined at a later date? Did you want us to comment on the option?
Yeah, if you want to comment, most definitely commenting on anything on the presentation. As we sort of stated, we have done a concerted effort, but of course we're always open to additional feedback. I mean, I think the biggest challenge with any socio-demographic question and answer options is that they're never going to be perfect. So and so it's just about how can we do it in a way that is capturing people in a to the best of their ability, that they can see themselves represented, but without having sort of a laundry list of answer options, which could be really hard for data analysis.
Well, what I really wanted to know was whether a decision had been made on whether to use a single question or the more detailed question. So, and whether you were looking for feedback on which would be probably preferable.
Okay, thanks for that question, Stephanie. So we are presenting in the guidelines the two options and outlining when it's best to use either option. The one of the big pieces of feedback we've received to date related to rolling out the various socio-demographic questions on our core list is that there's already 10 data points. So adding 4 questions just for one data point can also, there's like considerations related to time, to space on a form, all of these, you know, and then the analysis set on the end. And so, and the other critical piece is that we only want divisions and departments programs to collect the second option if they're going to be analyzing and using that data. So so how we're pitching it in the guidelines is to present the two options. You know, at minimum, we want folks to select option 1, but if they is an intention to really look at access barriers for the various services and programs, then we're really going to encourage those divisions to also select the second option instead, but we're leaving it up to divisions for now. And again, as part of the pilot, we want to look at the usability of the data that's collected and looking at that as well, so that there is a potential to make updates to these questions in the second phase.
And I'll just give you, again, from my feedback, when I was working, I ran TD's disability strategy for Canada, and we collected data points on disability. I was primarily in disability. And one of the things that I'm going to indicate, I know that there are a lot of broad strokes under disability, but when we do talk about either functional barriers and things like that, I do find that a smaller data point set is better with the option that you've provided to provide specific if it's not listed ahead above, rather than a laundry list. It does become a bit too much, let's just say. And it's also too much when we start to aggregate, because then it doesn't give us enough info. And it's then you start clumping groups together. So it's better to have those, I think, personally, in a way that sort of, like if it is specifically hearing, if we sort of do the, and I'm going to be really colloquial here, but the down and dirty, the main, ones, and it feels like you've captured those here for me. And that's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Stephanie, thank you. Our next member to question, and unless anybody else adds their name, I'll reserve. Oh, Miranda, thank you. Great. And I think that would be it. Okay. So Stephanie to question, and then Miranda. And for those who are probably noticing, I'm letting the members run the clock a little bit, just because I think this is an item that you've all been waiting for. I just want to make sure that we have a full discussion today. Stephanie, Michelle, my apologies. I've got 3 screens in front of me. You can't see, but it's actually Michelle.
Is it Miranda or Michelle?
It's Michelle next, and then Miranda. My apologies. Michelle, you have the floor.
Excellent. I actually realized in composing my thoughts that I only have comments, so I'm happy to hold those until the comments section.
Great. Thank you so much. Then in that case, Miranda to question.
Yes, thank you. Thank you both for your presentation. I think that it was very thoughtful and thought-provoking at the same time. I'm just wondering, in terms of your objectives as well, if there is a consideration or alignment with responsibility for accountability. And what I mean by that is, coming from government-funded community employment service in dealing with employers from different industries, different sectors, and even, within the organization that I work within the Toronto District School Board. Sometimes we see a lot of dynamics happening where there are organizations, companies that are collecting data and reporting to the government because of diversity legislation, reporting on numbers of diversity hires and things like that. So that part, has been occurring for a good long time. But another side of what I see from that is often a lot of the positions that people from the different diversity groups that are hired into are most often entry positions, lower entry positions. Things like customer service, receptionist, secretary, data entry clerks, things like that. But when we look at higher level positions, it's not happening so much. And we could refer to it as the glass ceiling, or that type of terminology. And I'm just wondering if your work is also aligned with becoming within that model a change agent to kind of change that dynamics that's happening, where it's maybe a few skeleton staff that organizations are hiring for within the diversity groups, just for reporting purposes. But a lot of the main work that needs to be done or action to be taken is not there. So I'm not sure if I'm explaining it in full detail, that type of picture that is going within these types of situations. But I just want to present that as well as a thought and aspect and see if you have put in some thought into that as well in your process. If this is for either one of you or both to comment and answer if you like.
Hi, Miranda. I just wanted to understand your question. So are you asking about, I'm not actually quite clear around about your question. Is it related to uh, in terms of accountability about how we're going to be using the data so that it's not that there is some clear changes made with the use of the data versus it just collecting it for the sake of it and minimal changes done?
Exactly. Yeah.
Yes. So most definitely, we as you can see from, I mean, you'll see from the report, there's been extensive research and consultations and efforts put in to ensure to start to do this at the city, we want to do it right and we want to do it well. And one of the key areas is around how are we using and collecting and using this data to inform our existing equity priorities and strategies as well. So there is that is something that we and that's why we've approached it with a phased implementation with pilots, is because to launch it out, across, like starting with a citywide implementation as phase one, it could be fraught with various errors, various mistakes made, various, moving forward without being intentional around how you're collecting the data, who's being involved with guiding those pieces, et cetera. So we are very much committed to doing it well and right, but we also really want to learn from phase one and the pilots to see what is effective, what has worked, what hasn't worked, what are the challenges, and what we need to do differently to recommend a citywide approach.
That's great. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. Then just we're going to move on to our speakers this very soon. I will start with Michelle, and so get ready to provide your comments. But I have, and I see Michael, thank you. I have two questions of staff. When it comes to the questionnaire component and recognizing that the interface has got to be as friendly as possible, is the intention to sort of survey and ask the user, client, participant through an electronic means upon registration, and then they're prompted, or is it just paper, or is it a combination of two? Just because that list does become a bit of a laundry list, and we don't want to exhaust people as they're trying to register for a program.
So I can answer that, and Erica, please jump in after me. Is that there's not one recommended approach. It's really going to be dependent on how the service delivery model and the intake process. What is known as a best practice is that at an intake or a registration can be the best time, just because you're already collecting information. At the same time, it might not be the best place to ask some of these more sort of quote unquote sensitive questions. So if you have an ongoing relationship, like say for example, as an OW client with your caseworker, there might be other opportunities to ask those questions at a later date once you've established a bit more trust. And so there's various ways to collect this information. It's really going to be dependent on how the service delivery model is in place. And we know with, say, for example, the TPH case and contact tracing is done by phone versus other ones may be done electronically, other ones might be done on paper, others might be done in person. And so there is going to be guidelines and approaches done for each one to ensure that the information that's needed is being shared with everybody being asked the questions, and ensuring that the data that is collected is entered into whatever technological system is in place so that the data is there to be able to be aggregated and analyzed and disaggregated later. So there's not one approach that's going to be done.
Okay, thank you.
I was just going to add one small thing, if that's okay, which is just to say that, so in examples where someone is doing an online survey, one of the things we've tried to include in the guidelines are directions on how to try to not include too much at once. So for example, if there's a set of options that would only apply to certain groups, for those only to appear if they check yes. To address that concern as much as possible when people are self-administering something.
Great, thank you. And because services and program levels are always tied to budgetary allocations, how do we? And I know, and this I might be straying a little bit off, but I think it's entirely tied to the issue. But oftentimes through the budget process, there's a statement, an equity impact statement that's provided to most reports, to most expenditures. Is the intention to extend the same tool so that when council members and those of the public who are reviewing those public reports will also have a better understanding who within the general population is actually gaining access to the services that the City of Toronto is providing and who is being excluded? Because that, to me, is a very powerful way to signify exactly how effective are we in our service delivery. And is there that intention at some point to extend this into the equity impact statement in a more detailed and structured way?
Oh, do you want to start, Maria?
No, go first and I'll chime in.
Okay, yeah, so I mean, I would say that yes, the equity impact statement is a great example of one of the ways that this data can be used to promote and ensure more accountability. Back to Miranda's question about accountability and responsibility, it will take some time to have a good, robust set of data, but when we're at that point where we can actually say who is accessing our services and maybe say something about who is achieving which outcomes from our services, that can really say a lot about, it can inform how we plan our programs and services and should inform how we plan them and who needs to be focused on to ensure better access and outcomes and how we need to do that. But as well, there's a huge accountability opportunity here, right? To actually start to demonstrate who we're serving and who we're not, and where the gaps are. So I would say absolutely that is one of the main, an important purpose and long-term use of this data.
Great, thank you. Yeah, I think ultimately that would be extremely helpful just because the statement right now as it stands is rather vague. And I don't recall in my time at City Hall whether or not I've actually seen a report, read a report where a specific population was identified as being excluded. And especially when it comes to people with disabilities, I don't ever recall ever reading that a service will have access to a service will be restricted because of limitations to barriers, such as shelters. We know not every single shelter is accessible, and yet there's very little to nothing ever referenced in the reports that talk about that restricted access. So thank you. I appreciate that this is not a simple body of work, and I know that's interwoven, and I just want to say thank you. We're going to head over to speakers, and I know that we're going to start off with Michelle, followed by Michael. I saw Liv's hand go up as well at one point. Anyone else to speak? No? Okay, so why don't we start with Michelle? Go ahead, Michelle, you have the floor.
Thank you, Councillor Wong Tam, and a huge thank you to Erica and Arena. This was a great undertaking, and it's really encouraging to see folks like Wendy and some critical disability studies colleagues on the list of consultants. I know you're getting great feedback there. So I just wanted to speak a little bit more specifically to collecting responses and data from people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. So just adding to what Liv and Michael have put forth around making the survey more plain language. I do appreciate that you've certainly made it more plain language than a typical or academic approach, but certainly videos or pictures and working alongside communities in a participatory way, like Michael said and Liv said, would be really helpful here. Some lessons that were learned personally from the agency that I work with around the recovery and rebuild survey is that you really need to engage with folks with developmental disabilities themselves, either directly with those sort of accessibility features that I just put forward, or perhaps going to an agency like the one I work with, because we really took the time to reword the survey completely, make it in a format where we could bring it to folks and have those in-depth conversations and then put together that data around what folks want and need from the city. So that just really does take some deliberate input and time. But it's really necessary work, because otherwise, if you're sending out a survey virtually, you're likely only getting people's families, caregivers, or staff answering at best. And those are very important perspectives, but they're not enough. To engage with people with developmental disabilities directly, you really need to have a strategy in place. And so I just wanted to put forward that I'm happy to help, or I'm sure any developmental services agency is happy to support as an organization. And it would really only benefit your responses. This is already coming from a place where trust is established and accessible formats are in place. So happy to do that. Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. Our next speaker is Michael.
Okay, I'm just unmuting. Thank you. I was just going to say, echoing off of what Michelle just said, though, there are a lot of people with disabilities who do have a low level of literacy. So I think that is something to be mindful of. I was also thinking too, and I realize it's just the pilot project, but the focus is on like the Toronto Central Local Health Integration Network. And there actually are 4 LHINs operating in the city of Toronto. And I think the experiences of people under the different LHINs are different. Where I fall, even though I live in Toronto, I fall under the Central LHIN. And yet the answer all the time is the Central LHIN is underfunded compared to the other LHINs. And so I think that might be something too, that when you're going to be doing your outreach, look at the other LHINs, like the Central LHIN, for example, people in Scarborough, they fall under the Central East LHIN. People out in Etobicoke fall under the Central West LHIN. I was also just sort of similar to what Stephanie was asking earlier about the 11 organizations or agencies. It would be really interesting to sort of look at to see where those organizations or agencies are sort of located geographically. What I oftentimes find is a lot of the organizations are all centered either downtown or midtown Toronto, and yet agencies, say, out in East Scarborough are excluded, or agencies out in the Northwest area are excluded. So it'd be kind of interesting to see from a geographical point of view where the agencies are, because they're going to be getting a certain area of people. I'd sort of been talked a little bit earlier about surveys. I think one of the things that I'm finding is there's a level of survey fatigue, not another survey. Oh, how long is this one going to take? That I think what I've noticed with some organizations, they'll build some sort of incentive into it where, you know, if you do the survey, your name will be entered into a draw to win, like, say, a $50 Tim Hortons gift card or something. That, again, don't know what the funding is like, but that might be an incentive to consider. And I think as well, just, you know, it's been brought up, building trust is going to be a major, major issue. And for some people who have been harmed in the past or who have had negative experiences, it might be very, very difficult to build that type of relationship. So I have a feeling that there might be some sort of resistance. And this is why I brought the issue about participatory action research, where somebody might say, okay, we've had a researcher come before, we've had a negative experience. But if we know that there's a member of a particular community and I'm part of that same community, and there's a part of the research team, I can trust them because I know they're not going to lead me astray. And so that's why when I brought that up earlier, I sort of see that that is something that, and again, might not work for this pilot project, but later on to help try to build that trust. So that's the end of my comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Our next speaker would be Liv. And before Liv speaks, are there any other members who would like to add their comments? I'm just moving through the screen. I see you, Stephanie. Thank you. Anyone else? Okay, so Liv next, and then Stephanie. Go ahead, Liv. You have the floor.
My apologies for being a disembodied voice. My internet has not hung in well through this meeting, so the bandwidth is better if I turn off my camera. I wanted to just pick up a little bit on what Wendy mentioned earlier about the history of data collection and disability communities. There has been a long history and difficult history of data collection that is medicalized, that is used in predictive ways to deny people insurance, that has been used in eugenicist ways. So I think there's a lot of value in what Wendy has brought up, and I'm really glad to hear that.
Liv, I apologize. It's Kristen speaking. I'm just going to interrupt. I lost your audio. I'm not sure if everybody else is hearing you okay. No.
Oh, am I not clear? Sorry.
Actually, now you are clear. So whatever you're doing, just don't move.
Okay.
And please continue.
So I was just agreeing with and kind of emphasizing Wendy's comment about the sort of difficult history of disability and data collection. I'll keep that brief. The other piece I wanted to speak to is, in general, a communication strategy. I think a lot of the work can be very internal when we're talking about different units and data collection. But I think a communication strategy could be helpful in a couple of ways. One, to address what Michael and others are noting about trust and collection of data, people being concerned about data collection being used to deny them benefits, etc. And also, certainly, collection fatigue is real. We see that a lot too. But also in terms of communications being an opportunity, the city is taking a leadership role here in collecting this data at all and in disaggregating data at all. And I think there's an opportunity to communicate that to the public, to other community agencies, to partners of the city in providing services, to point out, this is something we're doing, and to encourage others to follow that example. So I think a communication strategy could be helpful in a couple of ways. And in terms of plain language, I think the best way, and I think Michelle is speaking to this as well, to get a handle on plain language and other supports that can assist is to include a user group when designing those. So I would encourage you to do that as well. I hope you guys heard me. I'm sorry about this internet trouble.
Liv, most of your comments were crystal clear. There was just a little patch of time, and I don't think it lasted more than 10 seconds where your audio cut out. So thank you. Finally, to speak, if no one else is coming on the screen, we would have Stephanie. Stephanie, please go ahead.
Thank you. Sorry, it was, I just hadn't mentioned it when I was had an opportunity to speak. But with regards again to just the 11 organizations, again, thank you. I know you will be providing a list, and I just wanted to comment that I'm hoping that the list casts a wide net in the sense that organizations that provide different services, i.e. Something that will look at employment, something that will look at housing, something that will look at different areas that are obviously a concern or impact people with disabilities. And that was the only thing I wanted to comment on. Thank you again.
Thank you, Stephanie. Anyone else? Seeing none, I just want to convey my thanks, my sincerest gratitude to staff, and to move that we receive this item for information. Your presentation was excellent. It was detailed, and I know that there was a huge volume of work and research and consideration even before you came to our committee, which I am deeply grateful for. It actually shows us a level of respect, and the fact that you were approaching this work with a lot of thought and knowing that you're thinking through all the way to application, and how you are going to then gather this information, the governance model to be sorted out, the user interface, it is just excellent. And I want to just say everything that you have done to get to this point, I know was not necessarily easy. And I know this because I actually helped, I guess, sort of encourage the city to move towards creating the disaggregated strategy. And the challenging component of this work is that there hasn't really been too many municipalities who have done this work before. So, you know, Erica and Narina, and to everyone in the People, Equity, Human Rights Department, you are venturing into new territory. And I think that requires, number one, some brave moves, because doing nothing is so easy. No one is going to yell at you when you do nothing. It just means the status quo. Doing something and putting something out there for consideration, for debate, is quite bold. And it's in that case, it's also visionary, because you're now enabling us to see, I think, ourselves in this work. And for this committee in particular, who has been oftentimes overlooked even in the recovery efforts. We've had lots of conversation in our committee about how this population has been disproportionately impacted even by COVID, but unfortunately has seen itself largely silenced or overlooked. So to see you put so much thought into the issue of that's impacting the community, I think is really quite number one, very important, but also it just shows that you are thinking and responding to everything that we've put forward. And I can't say enough thank you for that. The level of respect, the level of dialogue, and the consideration. So with that, all those in favor of receiving the report for information, any opposed? That carries. Thank you to you all. Okay, so I believe item number 2 is ready to be dispensed before we head to item number 3. And item number 2, if you'll recall, was the matter that we held down because I know that Stephen Reynolds is still on the call, and I want to make sure we can release him. Now, Michael, I'm going to call upon you because you did submit communication to this committee, and I regret I did not see it earlier. Would you like to move your motion, because I've asked staff to amend it somewhat. Your motion gets to the heart of the broader communication around the access points to City Hall and the entrance to City Hall. The only thing I've asked staff to do is make sure that there's a report back date, so it doesn't go into the sort of the open space of requesting work and not seeing it loop back to us. Do you want to speak to your recommendation?
Yes, thank you so much, Councillor Wong Tam. So basically, the recommendation was just that there needs to be public consultation, and that it was with regards to the shelter that is on Bay Street. As you can see, there are photos that were attached. It looks fairly forlorn. It looks like it's been abandoned, and I think it sort of ties back to the issue that Adam brought up in his deputation, where
Michael, sorry, I apologize for interrupting, but I think if you could move the recommendation, move your motion, and perhaps read it for us.
Okay, I don't.
That might be helpful.
If I could have it on the screen, that would be great.
Great.
Okay, there we go. So I'll read it. So I'm going to move to the motion that 1, City Council direct the Deputy City Manager, Corporate Services to hold public consultations with specific outreach to people with disabilities regarding decisions on any proposed public safety and security measures at city facilities that would impact access and accessibility, and report back to the Toronto Accessibility Advisory Committee in the first quarter of 2021. And number 2, City Council requests the Toronto Transit Commission Board to request a Chief Executive Officer, Toronto Transit Commission, to hold public consultations with people with disabilities to seek feedback on how to improve the safety and accessibility of the small outdoor shelter at the Bay Street entrance near City Hall, and to make a presentation to the Toronto Accessibility Advisory Committee to seek feedback on the findings of said public consultations.
Great, thank you.
I have a question. Are we able to discuss the proposed motion? This is Stephanie.
Yes, you can. I just was going to ask if Michael has concluded his remarks.
Yes, I have.
Okay, thank you. So then heading into questions of the mover, go ahead, Stephanie.
Oh, it got off the screen, but one of my questions regarding the motion, it indicates public consultations, and I'm just reporting back, and I guess I'm just wondering. I think that sounds like a very short time frame to be reporting back in 2021. So I'm wondering if whether or not we should be, and this is again, I don't have any. I'm just asking a question whether we should ask for what for their current proposals before we ask for public consultations. I'm just thinking that I just don't want to have them come in the first quarter of 2021 and say, we haven't had an opportunity to do public consultations, et cetera, but they still might have an idea in terms of what they would like to propose relating to access to City Hall. So I think that's a question for how the committee feels as well. I don't know.
I recognize that was a question of the mover, but perhaps Michael, would it be okay if I jumped in?
Yes, by all means, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. I think because we probably don't have the appropriate staff here from the city, the deputy city manager's office, if we let the motion go as is, I can work with them to ensure that we have a realistic report back date and have this item amended at the executive committee. So that's one option. Option number two might be we let it go, and the staff sometimes, as you have experienced this on numerous occasions at this committee, the reports don't always come back in the timely manner that you wish it to. But either way, I am happy to track this.
This is Stephanie again. I guess I'm just. I think I need to understand if there is something that is in the development stage. Oh, there isn't. Okay.
No, I'm sorry. I'm not shaking my head because there isn't. I'm shaking my head because this particular matter was. I think why there is this confusion is because you were hoping to receive a presentation on a very specific matter that was generated by a member of this committee. But because the presentation was not before us, it's now ballooned into something a little bit different, not exactly not related, but it has gotten bigger now because of Michael's motion. But I still think it's actually it's a worthy pursuit, just because it's important for us to review the intended capital improvements. You will probably recognize that we have received staff report in the past on the City of Toronto's strategy around accessibility and physical capital improvements. Which is why I'm suggesting if you allow me to track the item, I will work with this deputy city manager's office and other relevant staff on when we can get the appropriate report back. And they may come back to us in the first quarter of 2021 with simply a proposal and an update on what they've done.
Thank you. Appreciate the answer.
Yeah, thank you. Howard, go ahead. To question.
Are we giving up on the Hagerman entrance and the Wheel-Trans area in terms of their redevelopment or discontinuing of that area? All we've been talking about so far is the Bay Street bus shelter.
The question is for Michael.
You know, that is a very good question, Howard. From what I understand, though, is that back in February, and I'm going back to the Global News report, was that City Hall, in the interest of safety and security, was going to close the Hagerman and Elizabeth Street entrance and make it staff only, thereby requiring people with disabilities, including Wheel-Trans users, to use the Bay Street entrance. And, you know, because of that Global News report and because of the good work that our deputant Adam Cahoon did, basically the city reversed that position and has basically left the Elizabeth and Hagerman Street entrance open. However, as we all know, COVID-19 hit. City Hall has been closed down to public events. And so I think right now it's created this giant question mark in the sense that what is the city's plan? And as we saw from the presentation this morning, unfortunately, Mr. Reynolds had really no answer for us. So I don't have any more of an answer, but I think the concern is, what is the city's plan? Are they redeveloping Hagerman and Elizabeth? Are they redeveloping the Bay Street entrance? I don't know. And this is why we need public consultations, because even if the plan is to take the Elizabeth and Hagerman Street entrance, make it staff only, then we're going to be forcing people with disabilities and wheelchair transfers to use the Bay Street entrance. And if you look at the photos, it's forlorn, there's no signage, it's not safe. What if there's a committee meeting at night? And so I think the idea is that we need to really figure this out and have it as broad-based as possible. So I hope that answers the question.
Can I ask a follow-up question to
Actually,
the same
hold on, Stephanie,
point?
hold on. Howard, does that answer your question?
Yes, it does.
Thank you. Stephanie, I know that you want to come back and ask another question. Is that correct? And I just want to.
It's just a confirmation of a point.
Okay, sure, of course. Just hang on tight. I just want to recognize that this item is to ask staff to do some additional work and to come back. So this will not be the exhaustive conversation that we will need to have. And I think part of the confusion right now is because there was not a full presentation, you're now all sort of trying to figure out what is going to come back, because you were never presented with any good information. Now, I know that Stephen. Yes. Hang on, please, Stephanie. I'm just sorry. I have to move the screens. I'm not going to forget. I cannot forget you.
My memory is not as good as it used to be.
Oh, I see. Okay. You know what? Go ahead then.
Sorry, I just wanted, is there confirmation that the Haggerty entrance is absolutely not going to be able to be used by people with disabilities? Has that been, I know he mentioned a global article, or I haven't seen that, I'm sorry, but has City Hall actually indicated that that's no longer going to be available, even if, or is there an opportunity for, a security, the word I'm not getting the word I'm looking for, but an opportunity for people with disabilities who have used that or need that drop off to still use that drop off? I guess that's where, is it 100% confirmed that that is not going to be accessible for us any longer? And I mean us, people with disabilities or wheelchair users.
Stephanie, thank you for your question. I think you were trying to ask a clarification of the mover. Michael has already indicated he doesn't have the information. However, we do have somebody else on the call in the meeting still with us, and that is Stephen Renaud. Stephen, your mic's been on throughout the entire meeting. I hope you're still there.
Yeah, I'm still here.
Would you be able to answer Stephanie's question right now?
Unfortunately, no, that is a security issue, and it would have to be addressed by them as to what's being done with that entrance. Unfortunately, I don't have that answer. And I do want to apologize to the committee. I didn't come here and intend to waste your time. It was a misunderstanding on my part, and I do apologize.
Okay. Stephen, thank you. I think because we have the motion that's in front of us, and because we actually cannot receive the presentation for information because the presentation didn't have information, adequate information for us to receive, either way, this matter is going to have to come back to this committee. My commitment to you as the chair is to try to track this item and find out exactly where it is in the bureaucracy so that you can actually, number one, have the presentation that you should have received. which was generated from one of the members' motions. So it's not exactly how I had envisioned it to turn out, but it is what we have now. My suggestion is that we perhaps just adopt the motion as amended at this moment, and then I will try to track this between now and the executive committee, which is where all our recommendations go for a stamp of approval before it gets to city council. And if I need to amend it to reflect a more realistic report back date, or further enhance it based on additional feedback that you may offer me offline, I will do that. But at this point in time, I don't know if we can actually do more with what we have, because we just don't have, unfortunately, enough. If there are no more questions of the mover, I would suggest that we vote on Michael's motion. Okay, all those in favor? Any opposed? That carries. Thank you very much, Michael, and everyone who has taken a keen interest in this matter. Moving on to item number 4, and this was the new item that was just added onto the agenda at the beginning of our meeting. And item number 4, as you'll recall, is consideration of renaming Dundas Street and other public assets after disability accessibility champions. Members, do you have any questions of staff? And I want to recognize that Wayne Reeves is here if you would like to ask him questions, or as well as questions of the mover. Maybe we can group them all together. Wayne Reeves is the curator of museum, as the chief curator of the City of Toronto's Museum and Heritage Services. Okay, we'll start with Liv. Go ahead, Liv.
Hi, thank you. My understanding is that the thinking around renaming Dundas has to do with the fact that Dundas himself was. Oh, here, I'll turn off my camera. My internet might not. Okay. Dundas was in part responsible for delaying abolition and is complicit in a lot of sort of racist activities. So my question is, I guess, of the motioner of Michael. I think it's very worthy that Wayne and those in charge of naming things consider the history of people with disabilities and disability rights activism in Canada. I wonder if, though, we want to be mindful specifically around Dundas that there is an important element of race to consider in the history, and if we want to think about the context of that specific street and campaign.
Okay, thank you, Liv, for that question. I think when I did the motion, it was time sensitive. I mean, the city had issued the press release September 16th saying that, about this report. This report was going to go to the executive committee. They had their meeting yesterday. My understanding is they adopted the report without any amendments, and then this report would then go off to the full city council that's meeting, I believe, September 30th. And so I think the idea was not necessarily just Dundas Street, but it also includes public assets as well. So there's Young Dundas Square. But I think you'll also see that there's the other part of it too, though, is, okay, the City of Toronto has this sort of policy, as it will, with regards to commemorating individuals, though. And I think right now what we're seeing is, I guess, a more clear or more thorough look through in terms of that policy. And so the idea was to see, okay, is there something to also include people with disabilities or disability accessibility champions? So, for example, when the city starts looking at things about either naming or renaming, is that considered at all. And I have no idea if that is. I'm not necessarily sure it's going to work for Dundas Street, but at least if there's something similar going forward in terms of the future, though, that would be helpful. And even I was thinking, and again, because the motion was time sensitive, I just sort of included a couple of names, like say Ann Johnston and David Lepofsky and Jim Flaherty. And there were even names that I didn't even think of right at the time, like David Onley, for example, would be somebody who's done a tremendous amount of work. But it would be interesting to see going forward to have the city come up with that sort of amendment to the policy to look at these things. And I think, you know, we talk at the city a great bit about diversity is our strength, but yet, as we've seen time and time again, disability issues are kind of ignored and disability champions are sort of thought about at the end. And so it's just an idea that if we're having this conversation, let's interject disability as well. So that's a long-winded answer to your question.
I'm wondering in that case, if we could amend your motion to maybe ask the city, Wayne and his team to include people with disabilities in some form of consultation around creating a list of possible people, events to commemorate as they look at all of these opportunities. I'm just a little uncomfortable. I mean, there are certainly people with disabilities in Ontario who are Black, in Toronto who are Black, who are worth considering, but I really don't want to take focus away from the efforts specifically around Dundas and around slavery, abolition, systemic racism, etc. But I think it's a very worthwhile endeavor to have community input from disability community, so that we can, you know, maybe look at generating a fulsome list that takes into account the spectrum, the wide spectrum of people who have been active in advocating for disability rights, and in folks with disabilities who have achieved things that are important and worth acknowledging and remembering. So I'm wondering if that would be a direction you would be interested in taking your motion, Michael.
Absolutely, and I think that's quite helpful. And just even thinking about what Stephanie said earlier, the expression about casting as wide a net as possible. So absolutely, I'm in favor of that amendment.
So just to seek some clarification, and I know the clerks are going to want to know, if it was a matter of striking out the word Dundas, but just to leave in the language of the motion, the recommendation portion around consultation for street renaming, or for streets in general, but not specify Dundas, just because I think, Liv, your point is to not draw away from the intention of Black history. But we can still, and then I think, Wayne, you would still have enough clarification that further renaming opportunities, opportunities to memorialize good work, this community would like to make sure that people with disabilities are considered. Would that be helpful, Liv and Michael?
Yes, it would.
Okay. And Wayne, I think I saw your hand go up. Would you like to perhaps offer some additional advice or insights?
So firstly, thank you for the opportunity to speak before the committee. And I'd like to highlight that in the body of the report that was considered by Executive Committee yesterday, we did highlight the need to consult with a range of stakeholders, not just BIPOC communities, but we specifically named the Accessibility Committee. And to date, we've really had some very helpful support on the whole Dundas Street renaming project from Wahida Rahman White, as well as Alma Kintan. So we're very much aware that this is a community that needs to be included in the process. We name your body in the report, and I'm looking forward over the fall and early winter to coming back to having these constructive discussions. I was really struck by the recommendations. I only saw the report this morning, so I apologize I haven't had time to go into it in detail. But it's extremely constructive, the notion of creating a reserve list of names. This is done in other municipalities so that we can proactively seize opportunities when they are presented to identify individuals, events, organizations that are worthy of being commemorated in municipal place names, including streets, parks, libraries, and other civic assets.
Great, thank you very much, Wayne. That's very helpful. We kind of veered off a little bit, and I think, sorry, there, I had to move my screen to see you folks. We do have additional questions to clarify the motion that's now being slightly revised. I'm going to recognize Stephanie first, and then followed by Miranda. No, Stephanie?
Well, my question was going to be pertaining a question towards Wayne. Is that, or are you wanting to stick with the
You know what? It was my fault because I opened it up. So why don't we leave it open? Just because Wayne has been very kind to join us today. So questions for either the mover or questions for Wayne. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you very much. I mean, I'm sorry, I'm not very versed in how things are named, and I'm glad that you're here. Thank you. And I do like the idea of providing a reserve list that we can provide, some suggestions to. I think one of my main question for you would be, and again, I could be wrong, but is there some form of policy around living, not living? I hate to say that, but that was sort of my concern, because I really felt uncomfortable when I heard in the letter names of individuals that have are still with us, because there are, I mean, just in March, David Smith passed away, and there was an article written by David Lepofsky talking about his behind the scenes work on disability rights. And I know that as a senator, he did a lot of things. So that's one of my main questions.
It's an excellent question that because there are a number of naming policies that the City of Toronto has adopted, property naming, street naming, and there is some variability in the policies in terms of breathing space between when someone passes and when they can be honored. But one of our goals is by the first quarter of next year to bring forward, I would hate to use the word harmonized set of policies, but policy revisions that speak to these questions about should it be 2 years, 5 years, 10 years? Right now, streets can be named after living people, but other assets don't have that ability. So we want to bring more consistency to the process, and that policy review process is underway by a number of divisions that are all tied into the Dundas Street project.
Great, thank you. Any other questions, Stephanie? Otherwise, we'll head to Miranda. Okay, go ahead, Miranda.
Thank you. I just want to say first, thank you very much for bringing this item forward. I think it's very important. And I'm just happy as well for the thoughtfulness, the insight, and the enlightenment that has been occurring with this subject. Considering all that's been going on in environmental factors, this is a great initiative. And I do have a couple of questions with this. So I'm just wondering, how will it be decided in terms of eligibility criteria of, who would be considered a suitable champion as a candidate for consideration? And my next question is there a consensus process that would occur for the selection of the successful candidates for the renaming of the streets. And also, I was just wondering if there was a consideration of just general positive messaging for street names, like things that can promote inclusiveness. So I think the other day I was driving around and I saw somewhere, I can't remember where, but there was a street name and it was called Engagement Road or something like that. And I thought, you know, that was very good. It's something that is a positive word, positive message, not really attached to any one particular person, where there might later on be something dredged up of the history of that person's name, where there's a lot of conflict and confrontation come in and negativity involved. So I'm just wondering about those things.
I'm assuming your question is going directly to Wayne. Is that correct?
Yes. Thank you.
Thank you, Miranda. That's why I didn't jump in, because I wasn't clear whether you were questioning Michael or myself. But
my apologies.
Thank you for that. That's okay. The notion of selection criteria, again, we've laid out in the executive committee report, again, to be considered next week by council, some of those principles that would inform selection criteria. Staff have already identified that in the existing policy framework, there's a weakness around highlighting objectives around equity and the pursuit of recognizing equity-seeking groups, as well as Indigenous communities, Black communities. So that process, again, we hope to have clarified over the next 4 to 5 months. It's a really important observation around positive messaging. As part of the Dundas Street project, I've had a number of people of color that have approached me directly and said, maybe we don't need to recognize individuals, but we need to recognize themes. And on numerous occasions, more than 5, less than 10, you know, the notion of Emancipation Road has come up as, again, that type of positive messaging that speaks to an equity-seeking theme. I thought this will be, again, very, very constructive to add into the process when it comes time to select new names, to rename existing assets, including streets. And I think, again, this could be a very helpful and extremely constructive activity by your committee to think about criteria that make sense from your perspective, as well as individuals, events, organizations that might be worthy candidates for going on to a reserve list.
Thank you.
Thank you, Wayne, for that reply. And I want to just acknowledge, and Stephanie, thank you for your question. I also just want to acknowledge that Wahida White is also in our meeting. And of course, Wahida is very qualified to speak to the matter as well. Wahida, would you like to just provide some additional insights on this process around renaming?
Yes, thank you guys. Thank you so much, Councillor Wong Tam. What I would like to add is that I am part of the group that is being convened to look at not just the Dundas Street renaming, but holistically as we look at this from a systemic perspective, as many of you mentioned, our policies, our naming, our monuments, etc. And I want to assure you that most certainly I've been advocating for, and it's been well received, and Wayne, who is leading this project, it's around looking at not just when we look at the monuments, but ensuring that whatever we put forward is accessible, and that our community, our disability community, are engaged in the process. So I want to acknowledge that there's definitely been discussions beyond the broader Black and Indigenous conversation, but particularly as well around ensuring whatever we do is created in an accessible format and contemplates our community, our diverse and intersectional community. And most certainly, I appreciate the feedback that you guys are providing to myself and Wayne today. So thank you.
Wahida, thank you for those comments. And I'm sorry I wasn't able to see you on the screen. I should have acknowledged you sooner. Are there any other questions? Otherwise, I think the clerk, I'm just going to jump out and perhaps assume that they might be ready to show us a revised motion.
Yes, we are. We are displaying now.
Okay, thank you very much. Thanks, Jennifer.
Councillor Wong Tam, I have a question when there's an opportunity to speak.
Oh, I'm sorry, Wendy. And it's a question, right? Not to speak, but a question.
It is a question. Yes, it's a question.
Sorry, then while the clerks sort through the screening, why don't you go ahead?
Thank you. It's just a quick question. I'm not overly familiar with this process, so I feel like we're talking about some of the detailed parts of this, and I don't understand the broad strokes. So just two thoughts, two questions. In terms of the criteria that's considered, does disability appear as one of the, somebody with a disability or who has advanced disability rights appear as one of the criteria that's considered in this context? And secondly, in terms of the public consultation piece of this, how does it work? How would it work? My question is both to the mover and to Wayne, to yourself. How would it work to have a public consultation to provide an opportunity for the community to nominate those folks that could be considered having met the criteria that I fully admit I don't fully understand, but that could be considered as being held for a reserve list? So two kind of messy questions there, but I would appreciate any thoughts that you have on those.
Well, maybe I'll jump in. It's Michael speaking. When I did the motion, it was just, as I said earlier, time sensitive, where we're having these sort of global conversations, and it's come up about renaming Dundas, and yet at the same time, like with everything else, disability issues were sort of always left, by the side. And so even what I was going to say when I wrote it up, it wasn't a very exhaustive list, and I had even forgotten about David Onley, and it was only because I had a conversation with someone about it before I actually did it, and I had mentioned some names, and they're like, "Oh yeah, those are great names, but what about David Onley?" And I had completely forgotten about him and his contributions as being a person with a disability, and him being the Lieutenant Governor of Ontario and his career in broadcasting. And so I have a feeling, even just with the public consultations, it's just even having that conversation, as it were, with people within the disability community, and just by starting that conversation in terms of just figuring out, where have advances been made. I mean, even Stephanie brought up about David Smith. Oh, that's right, I forgot. And again, I think that would be one way of getting sort of the ball rolling. Just having those types of focus groups where people can sort of share, or even asking a simple question is, who is a disability accessibility champion for you? Again, and that's probably just me just thinking of it just that way. But again, maybe Wayne, you can sort of answer more about what the city's processes are, because I'm not necessarily familiar. It's just this whole thing about renaming Dundas Street that I thought, well, I'm just going to join in on the bandwagon.
Thank you, Michael and Wendy. So as I had mentioned, the city already has a number of policies. One is the property naming policy. There's a street naming policy as well. And I'm not aware that the granular level of detail does exist that you're looking for. In other words, naming the disability community within those documents. They tend to be very, very broad and talk about celebrating notable Torontonians, Ontarians, Canadians, but do not get down to the level of recognizing the needs of specific communities. I mentioned before that we do recognize your committee in the staff report, and we do map out a public consultation and communications plan, and we call it round one, which will basically run from should council adopt the notion that we should undertake an engagement process that will run for 4 to 5 months. And again, raise awareness about these issues, educate the public generally about naming processes and issues, gather feedback on 4 options specific to Dundas Street, as well as this broader framework to commemorate individuals, events, and organizations. And so if I can just go back to the staff report, we're recommending a project of about $250,000 to be conducted between October and the first quarter of next year. And so we want to hear not just from the residents and businesses on and along Dundas Street, but not only is the street of citywide significance, but the issues, the broader issues around naming and commemorating are of citywide significance. And that's why we want to be very broad in our engagement approach. And again, reaching not just people along the street or BIPOC communities, but a whole range of Torontonians that will have a perspective. And again, I just have to commend Michael for raising the issues before the committee and seizing this opportunity to alert City Council that you're engaged, you want to be engaged further, and you have constructive ideas on the process front, which again I think will be very helpful for the staff team.
Thank you, Wayne. That and Michael, that answers my question. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much, Wendy. Michelle, to question. Are there any other questions besides Michelle's set of questions? Okay, because we actually don't have a report in front of us right now. We're just simply sending this along. Okay. All right. Go ahead, Michelle, please. And if you can also let us know who you want to answer your question.
Sure. So actually, this would be for Michael. Michael, so thank you so much for putting together this motion. I think it's a fabulous idea. But just thinking alongside, perhaps, striking Dundas as the specific street suggestion, I'm wondering if it would be wise, based on Miranda's, very rightly pointing out that sometimes when you name a street after an individual, things can come to light after the fact. It can become problematic. Would it be possible in this specific motion to maybe not have the names themselves and have a process in place where this committee could decide with Wayne's input? I'm just wanting to maybe put that forward as a suggestion at this point, maybe not having specific names, but more just the idea of having a process in place to decide if we will have names or we will have themes and concepts.
I was going to say, Michelle, that's a very good question, though. And it's interesting because when I say, or when I think of the word disability, accessibility champion, though, I worry that people might not understand what that means, or I worry that we're going to lose something along the way. And so when I was drafting it, I included names like, say, David Lepofsky, for example, because of his work. And I had mentioned the example of making the TTC bus stop announcements both audibly accessible, but also his work with the AODA, for example, and the creation. It's an interesting question. I don't know if we're going to lose something if we strike names out of it. And I also worry too that, like, I gave the other name of Ann Johnston, the former city councilor, who was like a trailblazer for women getting into politics. She was a seniors advocate. That I worry that sometimes if you don't have names, you lose something or you forget, or even some people will say, oh yeah, Ann Johnston, I forgot about her. So I don't know, it's an interesting question and I'm not sure about it. But then sometimes just having names also starts the conversation as well. So I don't know if that's a helpful answer.
No, I appreciate your answer, and I see some hands going up, so I will let other people address that. I was thinking maybe even just some criteria around it would have to be a person with a disability who'd made significant change for the Toronto communities. I'll leave it to other folks. Thank you.
Thank you. Stephanie, I see your hand, but if you've already asked a question, I'm going to suggest that we try to move this item along, largely because there's no staff report attached to this. All this is just to ask staff to consider and do some additional work. There will be a further and more robust conversation coming back. I think your hand is still up, so that does not satisfy you. You still want to ask questions of the mover or Wayne. Okay, so hang on, Stephanie, you're not first, but rather Liv is first. And then I'll come back to you, Stephanie, because that'll be your second round of questions.
Sorry to belabor this, Kristen. I know we do want to move forward. I think there's some wisdom in Michelle's ask, Michael, not to strike names as a possibility, but maybe to strike this.
Liv, I'm so sorry to interrupt.
Allow for.
Liv, I apologize for interrupting you again.
Oops. Can everyone hear me?
Your audio was just, it's cutting out.
Let me try one more time, and if it doesn't work, I'll just defer. Sorry, Michael, my suggestion was going to be not to strike out the possibility of naming names in favor of concepts, but along the lines of Michelle's question was maybe in this motion, not to start listing names so that we can allow for a fulsome process, because we could throw out names all day. We could talk about Ing Wong Ward. We could talk about Sandra Carpenter. I think rather than suggest specific names and then the entire committee has to kind of sign on to those specific people, if we just suggest that we come up with a list of names through a collaborative process, I think that might be a better way to go on this one. But I ask Michael if he would be okay with that.
You know what I was going to say? I'm fairly flexible in doing it because I think I just want to start the conversation though. But I think it was, and again, maybe Councillor Wong-Tam, you can sort of answer this as well. Once this goes to City Council next week, again, and I don't know how City Council operates, but sometimes seeing names strikes a bell or might get more support. So like, for example, seeing Ann Johnston's name there, they might say, oh yes, that's a good idea, but without seeing the name might not. I don't know, but I'm flexible either way, as long as we can just sort of move it along.
So thank you, Michael. Just to clarify, the recommendation that Michael is moving does not actually contain any specific name. The names that he highlighted, and there's just a few of them, were in the body of his letter just to show examples of individuals that might be notable and should be considered. But the recommendation itself does not name any names. So for those members who may be concerned that we are starting to curate a list of names, that is not the case before us. So and also I think it might be helpful because you have not seen the motion since I asked the staff to strike the word Dundas from it. If I can just ask the staff to place that back onto the screen. And I know that they haven't had the chance to, so we're all going to see it for the first time. And I know they've been trying to make sure that they've captured the essence of this committee. So the underlying portion of the motion and recommendation 2 says, with the input from people with disabilities and disability organizations for the renaming of Dundas Street or other streets or other public assets. Yeah, so I think just for the clerk, just because we're not in the same room, my intention was, my suggestion rather, and intention was to remove the word Dundas. So we talk about generic streets, so that when we talk about renaming streets and other public assets. and hopefully that does not distract from the conversation around Black history and or the erasure of Black history, but also make sure that we can insert the component around people with disabilities, not oftentimes being considered when it comes to the city's naming process. And then further to that, I just want to say, which might be helpful, that the City of Toronto already and currently has a naming process, and there's a policy that guides how we choose the decision making around names of assets and streets and sometimes memorial naming. And because you don't have the benefit of having that policy in front of you, we're not necessarily speaking to it, but we're speaking about it. And I think that when this item comes back, and I think that Wayne, we welcome you back to the committee, and I know that Wahida will be able to provide some additional support. When this matter comes back around renaming, it would probably be a very good idea to make sure we bring the policy with it, or any amended updates to that policy, so we can speak to it specifically in detail. Hopefully that is helpful. Yeah, are there any questions around the language of the motion now? And sorry, folks, I have to move my screen around to see you. I don't see any hands up. Looks like you all look pretty satisfied right now. That's great. If that's the case, I don't believe, I think we probably have exhausted the speeches as well. They were kind of covered in the questions. And before I move into, oh, Stephanie, you want to speak one more time? Is that you? Okay, so go ahead. And I'm going to ask you to keep your remarks rather brief.
100%.
Okay.
I want to be brief. I honestly just wanted to indicate the equity way. I thought that I just had that in my head as a suggestion. And one of the things that I had already, Councillor Tam had indicated, but I would like to request that if we can have the naming guidelines provided to us around the policy. I know that I think you indicated that there were also some developments that you're going to be doing to those policies, just to see that for us to be able to exactly understand that more fulsomely. And I wanted to make that a request. Thank you.
Thank you. I agree, and I look forward to meeting with the committee again to discuss this matter.
Thank you so much, Stephanie, for the question, and then also to Wayne. Although, and I don't believe there's any more speakers. Okay, so I've got you on the screen. All those in favor of the motion now, it's slightly amended. Any opposed? That carries. Thank you. And just for everyone's interest, if you Google City of Toronto naming policy, it will pop up. So if you want to get a sneak peek on this subject matter before it comes back to committee, you'll have a chance to take a look at it in its current format before it's amended. So there's a couple of housekeeping matters, and one of them is we need to move a motion to excuse some of the members who are not able to join us today. And I'm just going to move this motion that the Toronto Accessibility Advisory Committee excuse the absence of Glenn Hart, Jason Michelli, Michael McNeely, Karima Iwig, Bhuvani Sivaganam Sundaranam from the September 24, 2020 Toronto Accessibility Advisory Committee meeting. All those in favor? Any opposed? That carries. So thank you. That pretty much brings us to the end of the meeting. We've dealt with all the items of the agenda. It was a very good discussion. One final thing, and I regret to tell you that we are going to be saying temporarily goodbye to someone who has provided invaluable advice to this committee, who has been extremely helpful to myself as chair. And she's not going too far. She's not going forever, as far as I know. But she is taking a short leave, and that is Deidre Boyle. So I just want to acknowledge Deidre. You have been phenomenal as a partner to work with ongoing. I know you always approach with so much care and consideration. And I also recognize as chair that, boy, do you have a tough job with every division in this corporation descending upon you for advice. It is not necessarily easy. And I want to just invite you now to just say a few words.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. Yes, I'm having a baby, so that's why I'm taking a leave. I just want to say what an honor it's been working with this committee and getting to know the members over the last few years. And I want to thank all of you for the commitment and dedication you undertake and your undertakings to make the city more inclusive, both in your work in the communities and also in the work that you do here at this committee. And I also, it's really important, and I want you to know that it really does make a difference to the city government. From where I stand, I see that. So thank you all, and thank you, Councillor. And I also want to let you know that my awesome colleague Darren will be taking over the lead supporting role from the accessibility unit in People and Equity. So I think you all know Darren, and you probably noticed Darren's name on more of the communications. So if you have any questions, he's well knowledgeable in how the committee works and is a great resource. So please reach out to him as needed. So thank you all.
Okay.
And see you in about a year.
Thank you so much, Deidre, and congratulations on behalf of the committee members. Very exciting. I hope you get lots of sleep, despite the fact that I'm pretty sure, because I know that I'm not with a 15-month-old toddler at home. So that now brings us to the absolute, I believe, conclusion of our meeting. We wish Deidre very well. I want to thank the city staff. I want to thank the support staff, the audiovisual staff, and all of you for being very patient with me as the chair today. I actually had childcare challenges that fell through, and so this is why I wasn't able to make it into City Hall. But you've been all incredibly patient, and I really do appreciate the fact that you've been able to sort of work with me as I swipe left and right on my screen to make sure I can see and acknowledge all of you through today's discussion. And of course, our amazing captioner for doing all this wonderful work. Take care, everyone. Be safe, and we'll catch you on the other side. Okay.
Thank you, everyone, all the members and staff. Thank you, and see you next time.